This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. Today's episode, Carter Allen, the founding father of today's Boston music scene, is about the storied life and career of an extremely talented radio disc jockey, author, and person who supports and has supported the entertainment industry 24/7, 365 for more than 4 decades. Carter's an old friend of mine, and I can't wait to hear the new things he's going to tell me today. Welcome to Wachtelligence, Carter.
Well, hello, AJ. Good to see you.
Great to see you, buddy.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I remember something I learned my first job in radio, which was at my college radio station. It said, when in doubt, mumble. And it's helped me throughout the years. I've been still mumbling, man, all these years later.
Well, you know, people say that I have a great face for radio. I thought that was the next thing you're going to tell me. All right,
you and me both.
let's talk a little bit about, your radio history. You were first on WMBR, which was a college station, then WBCN, then WZLX, and now with iHeart. Can you give me a rapid rundown on all of that?
Yeah. Well, I started out originally in New Hampshire at WNEC, which was a college I went to up here, New England College. Then when I moved to Boston, I couldn't find a job. And a friend of mine told me that over at MIT, they were looking for people to staff their community radio station, which at the time was WTBS. I was back in like 77. And eventually we sold the call letters to Ted Turner for his network and became WMBR. I was there for a bunch of years until like 82. I had started working at WBCN, so I did both for a little while, and then
just you joined them at BCN in 79, right?
BCN in 79, yeah. And then I left BCN in 98, went over to WZLX, and I'm still at ZLX. And I think what a lot of people have told me is extremely unusual is that I've only been at 2 professional stations for my entire career. I mean, I've met people. My former program director was 11 stations before he got to Boston.
Yeah.
And the guys in the morning, WZLX, Carlson, McKenzie, and Heather, they've been on, God, a half a dozen stations that I know of,
Yeah.
So to be on only 2 professional stations is pretty rare. And I appreciate it. I've been able to live here my whole professional career, my whole life.
Well, right after you joined BCN, within a year, you were in charge of the Rumble. I think in 86, you became the music director.
Yeah.
Right. And let's just talk a real quick minute. We just had Johnny A on, and let's talk about the 1986 Rumble where you had Hearts on Fire and Gangrene. And that was just like symptomatic of Boston. You had the punksters and you had the mainstream people. And what do you remember about that show?
Well, I mean, every year you had a wide range of styles in the Rumble. Everyone from mainstream bands to edgy bands. But that year was just such a dramatic example of it. And the fact that the Rumble had grown to the point that it was on stage at the Orpheum Theater,
right,
which was sold out. It was a lesson in extremes. And I found in running the Rumble is that the judges we would get, which you were a judge, people like Steve Morris from the Globe and some guys from the record labels, we always found that judges like to vote cool. It's just like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They always seem to vote in the cool bands. Like the New York Dolls will probably go in this year, but, another band might not.
Right.
A band like Yes or Jethro Tull, they wouldn't go in.
Or Jay Giles.
So, judges seem to vote for the cooler band. So I sort of figured a Gangrene might have an edge, just because they were the cooler, edgy, reactionary band. But Johnny A played really well that night. I mean, that band played great. They had an awesome set. Of course, Beth was in the band, and she was singing incredibly. But when Gangrene did their, stage antics and smashing the keyboard and all this and that, I mean, it was emblematic of all the change that was happening in music at the time, and it really was awesome. I thought that they should have won that night, but Johnny might disagree. But Actually, he should disagree because they did a good show. Yeah,
I
it was
was
something.
standing next to Albert O, and like you said, the stage show that Gang Green did. There was Chris Doherty spitting into the audience, and the place going nuts.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
me and Albert O just said, "Holy cow!"
yeah.
And
That,
they and like Johnny A always said to me about that night, he goes, "The better band that had the better performance that night won."
yeah. Well, another thing that Johnny says, he says it was good versus evil, and evil won.
You had such a great team at WBCN. I mean, you had Laquadera, you had Mark Franto, Ken Shelton, Steve Strick, Tammy Heidi, Lisa Traxler.
Sure.
I mean, Billy
Good,
West.
yeah, Jerry Goodwin, Eddie Gordetsky.
Speaking about Charles Laquadera, you and him both left, BCN to go to the sister station, WZLX. You became assistant program director, and you had a long show, Sunday Morning Blues. What
Right.
happened to Sunday Morning Blues?
Well, I mean, I went over to WZLX in 1998, and the program director over there, Buzz Knight, said, you used to do the blues show over at BCN Sunday mornings, because the blues show ran on BCN for like 3 years. He said, I really like that show. Would you do it over here? So I said, sure. So I was on the air middays, but I also did this Sunday show and did the blues. It was 2 hours at first, and it did so well, it got an extra hour. So we did 3 hours.
It was a great show.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed being able to support local music on a classic rock station. You have less freedom to be able to do that because you play no new music with rare occasions. So that was cool to be able to support the scene and play this music. I was learning about the music as I was playing it, interacting with these artists. It really was a continuation of what I had done at BCN, just a different scene. But as time went on and passed, the audience for that show grew up. And that audience got into their 50s and beyond, into their 60s. And indeed, that happened to WZLX as well. Our audience was aging. And the demographic that we go after is 25 years old to 54.
Right.
So it got to the point where it was already in jeopardy when we were still owned by CBS. I was talked to a few times, and they asked if I could, try to freshen the show up by playing younger sounding music. Well, you can only do that to a certain extent when you're playing the blues. I mean, you can play some stuff like Derek Trucks and the Marcus King Band and some of the younger bands, but you can't play all that. You got to play some of the standards. And so I did my best to try to appeal to a younger audience, not exactly knowing what I would do. And then we were purchased by iHeartMedia. So iHeart knew exactly what they were buying. They loved the radio station. They felt that they could support us more than CBS ever did. And I have to say they have, but they also did a target study on who we were reaching and what kind of music we needed to be playing. And when you want to reach a 40-year-old, which would be the dead center of the audience we're trying to reach, the blues show wasn't making it. Mm-hmm. So the DJ in me totally bummed out, but the programmer in me understands why it happened. And so I just mark it off and say I was happy to have 19 years of doing that show on CLX. And then there were 3 years on BCN for that show as well. So that's the reason why the blues show went away. I still, every time I do, well, I haven't done much lately because of the pandemic, but every time I go out and do a book signing or go out and meet people, I always get at least 1 or 2 people that say, hey, what happened to that blues show? I love that show. It was a great audience. The midday show, I enjoy. I have a huge audience, but it's more of a generalized audience. But when you did the blues show, those people were all super fans of the music. So you could talk more about the songs and about the bands, and people would stay with you. And so I really enjoyed it.
Well, it's really important, especially in Boston, because the blues universe here, we were once so big. Now it's so small and getting smaller. And that's just a sign of it. I mean, look at the Boston Blues Society. They don't even have a website with all of the past 30 years of their articles. you can't look up Hugh Norton or
Right.
Professor Harp or anybody like that anymore. I mean, and that's just such a shame. We
Yeah.
were once such a big city, and now we don't have the blues support we once did.
Yeah. Well, I think to keep a scene thriving, everybody has to take a little chance. I mean, the radio stations have to take a little chance. Um, the venues need to take a little chance.
Right.
And even like the local papers have to give some space to covering some of these groups. I mean, the word has to get out somehow. So, I mean, we've got all the radio stations that played new music, going out of business,
Right.
FNX, AAF, BCN. Obviously, the river doesn't really play that much of a bluesy thing. So, except for college radio, you're not really getting any exposure for the scene. So, people aren't hearing about it unless they go digging for it. I mean, that was the beauty of BCN back in the day. We would play local music on the regular airwaves. So,
Right.
a band that got, Hearts on Fire, Johnny A's band would get a song on the radio. You heard it during Mark Pareno's afternoon show.
Right.
It's a big deal. And it just, I mean, and ZLX, okay, ZLX never made any pretenses about what it does. It's a classic rock station. It's a hit station. That's the way it is. I know what I was getting when I signed up for it. I enjoy it, but it's not the kind of station that will be exposing new music when the specialty show goes away. So the scene is having a bit of a difficult time because there's no way for the word to get out about the music except word of mouth.
Right. Well, you're saying that that iHeart, you just mentioned that they're giving you a little bit more room in different areas.
Well, I am assistant program director, which I'm just involved in backing up my boss when he goes on vacation. And I do my show, and I do a Sunday night show called Decibel Diaries from 10 to midnight. So that's pretty much what I do.
I am a DJ. I am what I play. Can't turn around, no, can't turn around, no. Oh, oh, oh. I am a DJ. I am what I play. Can't turn around, no, can't turn around, no. Oh no, I am a DJ. I am what I play. I've got believers believing in me.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. The other thing that's happened along with, the face of radio changing is that the industry, the music business has changed. I mean, those record labels aren't investing time in blues bands anymore. The only blues comes out in independent labels that don't have the budget. Plus, less people are buying CDs, so there's less money flowing to the labels. So it's more of a download situation. And the older audience that hangs on and loves the blues don't have as much of a computer mentality as the younger audience.
Right.
So that it isn't just radio. It isn't just the fact that the word isn't getting out about the bands. It's the word that the industry is not offering the support they used to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are even new bands that are coming out that are being, rock bands aren't getting support from the labels. So it's a lot harder than it was. It's a totally different thing.
Well, let's change subject a little bit. We're getting back to, you're also an author. You have 5 books out with, and you have a new one sort of on the way, you tell me. And you have, let me name the books. You have 2 on U2, Outside America, and U2, The Road to Pop. You have, what else? You have the Dinky Dawson, Life on the Road, The Incredible Rock and Roll Adventures of Dinky Dawson, who used to be the sound guy at the channel. He worked for Jay Giles, Fleetwood Mac, Steely Dan, The Byrds, Spanking Our Gang. And you have another book, your 4th book, Radio Free Boston, The Rise and Fall of WBCN, which was dissolved by CBS, as you mentioned, in 2009. And your 5th book is the Decibel Diaries, A Story of Rock in 50 Concerts. And I mentioned to you before, I went to one of the, that's a great book. I went to one of the shows that you mentioned, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, right when Nixon resigned. It was at Roosevelt Stadium, the outside concert in Jersey City. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. Crosby yells, the king is dead. The king is dead. Then he goes, Nixon resigned. And I'll never forget the next song as the place erupted. The place, they played Carry On as the next song.
Good.
And then I went to see Neil Young at Madison Square Garden when the Vietnam War ended. I don't remember what song he played there, but that's a great book. Tell us about, tell us, we're going to talk more about you introducing America to U2. We'll talk about that, but tell us about your other books.
Well, I mean, those you mentioned the Dinky book. That was a lot of fun to write. Dinky is a star in Boston, and amongst the members of the certainly the '60s and the '70s bands scene. Working with Fleetwood Mac in the early days when people didn't know them in America, and then moving on and working with the Kinks and Jake Giles Band and even Mahavishnu Orchestra. It was great to write a book with Dinky. Dinky is, I think, an unsung hero to the public.
Mm-hmm.
But writing with him was daunting because imagine this. Now, you write yourself. My publisher came to me and said, we've got this guy named Dinky Dawson who has a book, and it's just, we think he needs to work with somebody to help organize his ideas. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, he gave us 1,000 pages. 1,000 pages of information, and it's a little bit. We need to like. And so that was the whole thing with Dinky, was just trying to narrow the floodgate to a faucet, and he had so much enthusiasm, always does. That's the kind of person he is.
A lot of people don't realize that Dinky is one of the first sound engineers to mix a band out in the audience. Before that, if you were a sound engineer, you either mixed them right in the orchestra or off stage. But he just said he was one of the first people in England to say, hey, makes common sense. This is where they sound. This is where I'm going to mix.
Right. Well, some bands, one of the guys in the band would mix the band.
Right.
They said it when they went on stage and leave it and forget it. So, yeah, you're right. Dinky was the one that came up with doing that. And now it's been accepted for so long, we don't even remember it being any other way.
Right.
So writing with Dinky was great, and I enjoyed that experience of co-writing with somebody. The BCN book was commissioned by a publisher, which is something that I'm not used to, having someone call out of the blue and ask if you would write a book. But because of that publisher's
that's the Bible. That's the Bible. You want to know about BCN, that's the Bible.
Yeah. Well, what they wanted was a coffee table book with pictures. That was the original idea. And so I wrote two test chapters. And when my editor read the 2 chapters, he said, this is a very different book. And this is a better book. We should do it your way. And so,
what did you do with all the extra 8x10s of Ken Shelton?
I have them in a private place, and if I ever have to, I'll threaten to release them to the public. Yeah, the BCN book was a lot of fun, and you mentioned I tried to write that so that if a class was taught on BCN, they could use that as either a textbook or just a source that they could always count on. And Decibel Diaries was my publisher coming to me and saying, this BCN book was great. We should keep the momentum going. And so what ideas do you have? And then I mentioned to him that I'd been to 3,400 concerts. And he went, 3,400 concerts? I go, yeah. It's like, I kept a list. He goes, you have a list? I go, yeah. When I was a kid, like you, I kept ticket stubs. And then I started keeping a list on notebook paper. And then during the BCN book, I decided to put it all in database so that I could, could search it and find things. And so I had the database. I said, yeah, I have everything everything's organized. If you want to know how many Fish concerts I went to, or how many Clash concerts I saw, or how many shows I saw at the channel, I could always search it. So that's where that book came from. And I just thought of 50 great concerts I went to, including, the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, from the very early years of my youth to being involved in the business and going backstage and seeing bands and enjoying not only seeing the band play live, but also, getting to know the people behind the scene.
I've seen a ton of bands, local bands myself, Carter, and one of my favorite shows always was the Smithereens Face to Face in the Souls at the Worcester Centrum.
Yeah.
And I got to be good friends with all the bands, but I don't know why, but that just is one show I always really dug. What other great local shows did you see that you want to just bring up now?
Well, just on a comment on your show there with the Smithereens, that band was a great band anytime you saw them. That was a band that, rock and roll was all about. You never knew what the show would be. I remember seeing the Replacements at the Channel. They blew me away for the same reason that the Smithereens did. They just were a great rock and roll band, and it was complete energy, but precision. They knew how to do a show. It wasn't just, lighting a firecracker and letting it blow up. They knew what they were doing. Except during the encore, or the Replacements, when the guitarist ran on stage butt naked with his guitar in front of his crotch. That was a little, hey, how you doing?
Me and Pat Denizio, we grew up together. He was from Scotch Plains, and I was from the next town over, Springfield, New Jersey. So I know him since day one, and that may explain some of his bad behavior to you.
Yeah, well, it's all right. I'm trying to think, other bands, I love rock and roll bands. I mean, I love seeing the Who. The Who is probably, as far as big concerts go, the Who are my favorite shows, and U2, of course, you would expect me to say, but I have genuinely loved U2 during every phase of their career. And there's not many bands that are like that. You might like a band for a while, and then they move on to something new, or your taste changes, or you go somewhere else. I mean, for a long time, I wouldn't get involved in the Boston punk scene because I was still into progressive rock,
Right.
which I was enjoying before that. When we started off the Late Risers Club, which was our collective punk show on WMBR back in '78, there were 5 personalities involved, and we had different ideas about what we wanted to play on the radio.
Right.
We were to call this show the Late Risers Club, 5 different hosts, Monday through Friday. But each show would sound really different. I was into still playing like Bebop Deluxe and Genesis. I would play the Clash, but I'd want to play, Yes, too, or I'd want to play Heart. I mean, I remember playing a song on MBR by Heart from the second album, Kick It Out.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Oedipus mercilessly swaying me, not only for that moment, for year after year, he would bring it up, going, at least I don't play Heart. And I'm like, good, But anyway, we eventually formatted ourselves to a punk new wave show, which was the right thing to do. And it was a great source of energy. But what I was saying is, at the time, I wasn't so committed to punk rock. Our opinions about music, our enjoyment of certain types of music changes over the years, but it's some bands that you stay with your whole life.
Well, you introduced America to U2. Everybody knows that. Let's just get it out in the open. Please tell us what you heard, when you heard them, and how your relationship grew.
Well, I was being at WBCN, we get to play a lot of new artists, and I played so many new artists, and so many of them have gone away. I've had a lot of enthusiasm for those artists, and it doesn't matter. You can put in 100% and play their music on the radio and talk about them and tell your friends and MC the shows, but then if the band breaks up before the second album,
Right.
It's over.
Right.
U2 is a band that I heard in the summer of '80 at New England Music City in Kenmore Square. I was with Greg Riebman, who was a DJ at ERS, WERS, and then MBR.
Barron's worked there for a while too.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, Barron Swinfield, sure.
Yeah, and then we were opening the import shipments, and we were, putting on some of the records to hear where they come in. And I heard U2 and I said, "This is awesome. This song sounds like the guitar break from Dazed and Confused." And I'm like, it did. And Edge kind of ripped that. Nobody really talks about that. But it's like, wow, here's a band that's a new band with old school sensibilities,
Right.
new energy, old sensibilities, maturity there, even with such a young band. And the first album came in on import, listened to it, said, this is a great album. It excited me more than, most anything I've been hearing. And so they just happened to be coming to town and doing a show, warming up for a band that we were promoting at the Paradise, a band from Detroit, Beruga Bandit. U2 was put on the bill. We supported both bands.
And you start playing I Will Follow.
We started playing I Will Follow and Out of Control on the radio. And it wasn't just me on the overnight, because I was on the air on the overnights at that point,
right,
at BCN. It was getting played all the time. I mean, Mark Perrino was playing it, and even Charles in the morning was playing it. So when they came to town and played that first show, was the first time we met them. And they came on stage, and Bono was pretty raw as a vocalist, but the band was really solid. I mean, that was a great show they played. And there were 150 people there, and the famous story is that when U2 got done with their set, 110 people left. And that's true. Only 40 people stayed to see the headliners, Beruga Bandit from Detroit. U2 played that well. And they were freaked out by it too, because they did their set, and they were called back on stage for an encore. And this was their first tour of America. No one's supposed to know who they are. And you can hear Bono going, there's a lot of people here tonight that weren't supposed to be here. Right? And so they have to do another song from the set for the first encore, and then they get called out for a second encore. So they're repeating songs. So it was a great moment. And the fact that band came back only 2 months later and sold out 2 shows at the Paradise Theater, and came back later on that year and played the Orpheum Theater. Their rise was constant.
Right.
It wasn't, I saw potential in them, and so did anyone else that went to see them. If you went to see U2, you would tell your friend.
Right.
The band was amazing. And they would bring their friend. It's the only way to explain that exponential growth, because this is the early days when they first came here, MTV wasn't around yet.
Right.
MTV wasn't around until August of the following year. So you really had to work it, and you had to be something special to get that word of mouth thing going. And of course, you had to have a radio station like WBCN where I was able to play that music on the air. So for all those reasons, and the fact that the band just kept coming up with great albums, the second album was a bit of a holding pattern, and it looked a little rough for them, but the record label believed in them, and they got that War album out, their third album. And from then on, each album has been magical, really.
Here's a story about Bono you've never heard before. He came into Bunratty's. U2 was playing the next night over at the Worcester Centrum, and I think you probably announced him out there. This is a long time ago. So Bono comes into Bunratty's with 3 of the roadies. And of course, as soon as he walks into Bunratty's, I was told, so I sit him, the band's playing, a local band, and I sit him at a table, him and his 3 people, and while the band's playing, and I asked him if they wanted anything to drink. He wouldn't have anything to drink, and the other 3 guys, I got them, I ended up getting them 2 drinks, so they were there for about an hour with me, and Bono sat me down, and we were talking for about an hour about he kept questioning me about the music scene, about everything like that, and then he leaves, and I go back to work. So the next day, it was Saturday night, and then Sunday, Tiger Roy the Lion went to the show, and he was a bartender at Bunratty's, and he's telling everybody, I walk in during the day, and he tells me, he's telling everybody how great U2 was live at Worcester Centrum, and I go, yeah, I know Bono, and he goes, I know you do, and I go, how do you know that? And he goes, he told me. And I go, huh? So he goes, yeah, after the show, I was backstage and I was having a beer in the dressing room, and Bono comes walking up to me and goes, hey, mate, how you doing, mate? and Roy goes, fine. He goes, where you from, mate? And Roy goes, from Boston. So Bono goes, Boston, you know Bunratty's? And he didn't know that Roy was a bartender there. He goes, yeah, I know Bunratty's. He goes, you know AJ? And Roy, by that time, Roy is shitting. So he tells me that, and I'm smirking.
I'm sure he remembers. Bono's got an incredible intellect, and he
Oh,
remembers. He remembers it. He's like Peter Wolf. He never forgets anything, you know. So he would know that. And what I also find interesting is that that band, not only Bono, they have a natural inquisitiveness. They want to find out about things, and they fell in love with Boston. And once they fell in love with Boston, they really wanted to hang out and get around and see people. I remember them coming over to WMBR. It was, I think it was 81. It was 81. They came by the station because they wanted to see what a college station was all about. They hadn't really been in a college outfit. They met Henry Santoro,
Right.
and hung out for a while and then left. So, you know, they just have a natural inquisitiveness, and that finds its way into their music. You know, they're never writing about the same things over and over again. They're always writing about new and different things. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why that band is still around. That's one of the reasons why they're, you know, one of the most popular, famous bands on the planet. And 40 years later, they'll probably be doing another record that people want to hear. It says a lot these days.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Road runner, going faster miles an hour. Gonna drive past the Stop and Shop with the radio on. I'm in love with the modern world. Massachusetts when it's late at night, and the neon when it's cold outside. I got the radio on, just like a road runner, going around the highway. I walked by the Stop and Shop, then I drove by the Stop and Shop. I like that much better than walking by the Stop and Shop, 'cause I had the radio on. I felt in touch with the modern world. I felt in love with the modern world. I felt in love with Winnipeg and Rosendale, 'cause I had the radio on. I felt like a road runner.
Well, listen, I'm going to tell everybody right now how we met. We've been talking for a long time. Carter and I met. We were both writing for the Beat magazine. It was probably around 1985, my first year writing. And I can still remember you walking in, Carter. You walked in, and I was standing next to Mickey O'Halloran at the top of the desk. You had walked in from the back door where the parking lot was, and they introduced me to you. And you know something? You and me, you know, we know each other 35 years, Carter. And the funny thing is, I'm looking at you now, and you're looking at me. Our haircuts haven't really changed that much.
The fact that we can still cut our hair is an awesome thing. I love it.
But yeah, how did you get involved with the Beat magazine? You know, I never asked you that. Was that through Mickey O or through David G?
David G. You know, I always loved writing, and you know, I came to Boston to become a writer. I did not come to Boston to be a DJ. I was going to school up in New Hampshire, and once I graduated, the logical place to go would be Boston.
Right.
And I wanted to be at WBCN. I love BCN as a radio station. I sent my tapes out, but I didn't really get a response. I did get some feedback from Tommy Hadges, who you might remember, was the program director then. Some good feedback, which kept me working. But my main thing was I wanted to become a writer at the Boston Globe. I wanted to be the entertainment writer. Or back then, there were a few. Basically, I wanted Steve Morse's job. So when I couldn't get that job,
I think Steve still wants Steve Morse's job.
Yeah, that's another tragedy that.
Yes, isn't it?
That you know, I understand with viewership going online and less into the printed page. I understand there's got to be cutbacks.
You know, the next generation doesn't buy their news online, you know, doesn't buy their news in print, and they're not reading entertainment news, you know, at the 7 o'clock news on TV or 11 o'clock news. So, you know, if you're not online, you don't get that audience, you're gone.
No, but there are still outlets for writers, you know, you know that to be true. People still go out and seek to find out articles, because where can they go for local music articles? Well, they find a blog or they find someone that writes about that. Jim Sullivan still does articles on Facebook. So there are places to go and people seek them out, just like we used to seek out college radio
Right.
and Beat Magazine, which was a, freebie, which was handed out. I wrote for What's New magazine, for Pop Top, which and Sweet Potato,
Right.
and Boston Rock magazine, the short-lived Boston Rock magazine. And the Beat was, David G had seen my writing, and we talked about it. And he asked if I wanted to do a column. I was like, I'm in. I'd love to, because at that point in time, I was going out like every night.
Right.
I look at my database of the concerts I went to, and I look at some years going, my God, I went to 3 shows in one night.
Right.
But you could do that. You'd know the bands you wanted to check out. You could time your trek across the city. And if you went to the Orpheum Theater, the shows were always over by 11. That's the beginning of the night, right?
Right.
Still catch 2 clubs. You could still go to the Channel and end up at Bunratty's for the last band.
Well, everything's changed so much. It's, I wanted to ask you about that, some personal thoughts on this. I mean, that's one of the biggest changes that I see during the 80s when we were starting to hang out and the scene was just exploding. You could go to 2 or 3, 4 nightclubs a night, 7 nights a week. But now it seems that it's too expensive to open up a new nightclub, insurance. Local people don't want to have, it's a college town. They don't want college kids at 2 o'clock pissing on their lawns. And a lot of restaurants who are hurting through the pandemic and even pre-pandemic, they're just pushing the tables away after dinner and having bands come in and play. No stage, no pay, no PA. It's really bad. And that's like a really big difference that I see. You can't go out 3 or 4 nightclubs a night, 7 nights a week, and see all the bands. It's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And that was heading like that before the pandemic. What do you think is going to happen now?
Right. Well, you also have to think about popular taste. I mean, a lot of clubs are not booking blues bands anymore because they can get more money in booking a tribute band. They get more money from a band that plays, Beatles covers or Van Halen covers or something. So tastes have changed. There's not as many people who are into new original rock. Our age group always will be. You will always have an enthusiasm to go see live music. And our peers and the people that used to listen to BCN have that enthusiasm. But they're of the age now that only a few of those people enjoy going out anymore.
Right.
So there's 1/10 of the people from our age group that would be going out anymore. And the younger bands, the younger audience rather, have different tastes in music. And a lot of it has gravitated towards pop music, or just hearing the hits, So I know that there's other conditions that have led to this shrinking of the scene. Shocking shrinking of the scene, and you describe some of those, and they're all right, they're all real, but it also has to do with the audience. And I hesitate sometimes to say, oh, the good old days, but maybe some of these young people that are listening to music now need to hear more about the good old days and how it was and how you could go to 7 clubs and hear so many bands playing, and these bands would be able to make money and put out new records or CDs later on because they made their monies in the club, and the clubs made money because people were coming out to see them. That is an era that is gone forever, I think. I don't think even with the pandemic it would have been gone. Coming back from the pandemic, it'll just be bits and pieces trying to reform themselves. I don't think there's a great future for local bands, at least in the short term.
And that really sucks because we're a college town. We got music schools here, and people from all over the world every September come to Boston with playing instruments, playing music from their hometowns. This will always be a big center of music because we're a college town, and we're getting screwed right now because of everything.
Yeah. Well, things generally have to get really bad before something new explodes out of it. I mean, I remember when we started doing what we were doing with the music scene. There was a blues scene, as you mentioned much earlier, in Boston that was doing pretty well. And there were blues bands playing like Inman Square Bar, in Square Men's Bar, and places like that, Joe's. But really the scene started exploding at the very beginning of the 80s. And because people wanted something different, they wanted something new. There was an energy that started bursting forth, and it filled a vacuum. And I think maybe it has to get to the point where there is a vacuum, and these kids that are coming to Berkeley or moving to Boston that like to play need to become dissatisfied to the point where they start up a scene. They start up something new clubs, new places, new owners, new sounds. It's time for something to come around again.
Well, Boston is very interesting because we have, and I'm going to ask you about this because you're a lot more experienced in other college towns throughout the United States, but we have a commercial radio scene and we have a college radio scene, and you've had shows on both. How are they different? Because there are bands that can make a ton of money just on the college circuit.
Right. Well, as far as playing the music on the radio, obviously you have much more freedom on a college station, but you have a smaller audience. A smaller audience is more dedicated. So they're probably going to become members of your scene if you're the one that's driving the scene. The commercial station, BCN spoiled me. There's not many stations like BCN. Most towns that have a commercial radio station, it's a very conservative station. If it's a rock station, and they only play the biggest bands. BCN fed the scene because they were involved in playing the new music. If you're lucky enough to have a station like that, you can jumpstart a scene very well. Here in Boston right now, we don't have a commercial station that will feed the scene. Nothing out there now. The larger corporations that buy radio need a return on investment. So unless it's a mom and pop outfit starting out, I don't think that's going to change much in the near future. So I think the heavy lifting has to be done by college radio. And indeed, in Boston, we have a great college radio scene. Those stations have not gone away. They're still out there. Now, as to whether or not they choose to play the music from some sort of new scene, that's up to them. Mm-hmm. But again, if there's a vacuum and somebody like Oedipus jumps into it, he can have a profound impact because he's the only voice, and people could jump in on that. As long as we have forums, which we have, it could grow and move forward. No commercial scene will support that right now, but at least the non-commercial scene could give it a start. I jumped from WMBR to WBCN. When I was still at MBR, all my buddies are over at BCN. I had, Tony Berardini I knew. Oedipus was over there at that point. I got to know all the jocks. There was never any weirdness, if you will, because we were competing. In fact, Oedipus was a direct conduit, but Tony listened to MBR all the time. He would hear stuff in the Late Risers Club that would, wow, this is pretty good. And you talk to him about it, So actually, we fed each other in that situation. So, in that case back then, there was never any animosity or any maybe competitiveness in that you were really into hearing a cool new band that you could turn him on to.
Right.
You know what I mean? That kind of competitive.
Right.
But that's positive. That's really positive. Or we were both Rory Gallagher freaks. So I get the Rory Gallagher album first, and I'd be rushing over there. Hey, you haven't heard this, have you? Wow, you got the new one, man. And
are you still like that with him?
I don't talk to Tony as much. He's kind of retreated from the scene since he retired. But we talk about stuff on Facebook and this and that. But
you're talking about WMBR. A lot of people don't realize that was a huge college station, but it was also the college station of MIT, which were all college, which were all science nerds. I once Lou Salamone. He once asked me to be the judge of a MIT rumble.
Right.
And I said, wow, this is going to be interesting. So I went over there, and most of the bands really shit. They sucked. But you got to give them credit. These
Right.
were rocket scientists just picking up the guitar and rocking. And I was impressed, and I loved it.
Yeah, well, the early days over at MIT, when I first went there, it was run by the students, and they were very strict, upfront, uptight, wore ties, pocket protectors, the whole bit. They would do the bit on the radio, and then they'd go off building missile systems. But they didn't like Oedipus at first. But the mandate there was they didn't want you to be doing anything that you could hear on a commercial station. If you wanted a show on it was TBS way back then.
Right.
If you wanted a show on TBS, you had to bring something fresh and different. So you had you had the Ghetto, which was on at night. Those guys played funk and soul and, the early beginnings of hip hop. And so they had a whole block because nobody was playing this on the air. WILD was, but these guys went deeper into the music, and so they had a block. Then you had folk music shows, and you had the Irish music show, of course, and, and Caribbean show. So when Oedipus came from the moon, his show was original, and so even though they didn't like it, they gave him a slot, and he kept that slot, although it was rough at times. And when we started playing punk rock in the morning, they didn't like it at all. And there was one point where they tried to throw the punks off the station, and we formed a coalition with all the black dudes over on the Ghetto. And between the two of us, we formed this block that couldn't be screwed with. And so everybody calmed down, and the music continued. So, but it was an interesting situation. I do have to credit them, though, for allowing the music on the air in the first place. You just had to be careful. You couldn't, some of those punk records were pretty rough. You had to listen to them before you played them on the air. So, should I say,
Hey, Carter, on behalf of the next generation of struggling local musicians, keep on being Carter Allen. It's just so cool that, to talk to you. Hey, I have to end my episode, the Wachtelligence episode, like I always do, by asking you, what was the first concert you ever attended?
Oh, the first show, I remember. It was Joe Walsh and the James Gang. I saw Joe Walsh, and I was in high school, and I saw him over at a local college, and I stood in line 8 hours in advance for the James Gang. Nobody was there. It was December. We were freezing our asses off, standing in line. And the janitor felt so bad for us, they let us in, and we were able to sit inside until the show started. But I don't know, maybe you remember this, but the first time I ever went to a live concert, I couldn't believe how loud it was. You remember that? It's like, oh my God. Of course, we're in the front row. And they used to put...
I didn't hear you. Can you please ask me that again?
What'd you say?
My hearing is terrible. I have hearing aids.
Someone asked me, I said, when are you going to retire? I said, when I finally lose all of my hearing. Let me tell you one more thing. You were asking about local music. There's this local social media site which is dedicated to local music. Okay. It's called Everyone. It's EVRE, the number 1. So you can just Google it, and you can go check it out. It's a social media site. It doesn't cost anything to join, and there's a bunch of local bands on there. And they do a really good job of presenting videos, and there's chat rooms, and I think it might be the way forward. The person that called me about Everyone was Adam Clayton from U2. He gave me a call and said, there's this guy that's got this social media site, and I don't think that U2 is ready for it yet, but he's got good ideas, and would you take his phone call? So the guy called me, and I went on their site, and it's really together. You should check it out. I think you would be impressed. Anyway, I mean, if venues aren't really serving these local bands, and radio isn't serving these bands except college stations,
right?
With limited appeal, people really need to know where they're going to hear this music. This might be a good way forward. This may be the way that the new generation relates to hearing music. Because we found, and I should have mentioned this, we found there isn't really any reason, I'm talking like a programmer, there isn't really any reason for ZLX to play new music because the younger audience gets their new music from the web.
Right.
You know, they go online and they hear about a band, they listen to it, and then YouTube kicks up a playlist for them of new music. So that's how people are getting new music. It's not so much targeted as chance, though. So anyway, at least let's hope that's the savior of the future. Is social media might actually fill the gap.
Hear you.
All right.
All right. Thank you just so much for being on Wachtelligence, man.
Okay.
I appreciate it so much, Carter. It was great
My
talking
pleasure.
to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz, and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.